Welcome to Hatman Strikes Back Daily Boxing News. So Joyce versus Filip Hrgovic is signed. It's official. Joyce Hrgovic is on April 5th on the Frank Warren debut show on DAZN. Hrgovic steps in to replace Dillian Whyte. As far as I'm concerned, this is a better fight than the Whyte fight. Frank Warren the other day kind of held back on saying that. He almost caught himself. But then in a subsequent interview, he went ahead and said it. He said this is a better fight than the Dillian Whyte fight would have been. Dillian Whyte definitely won't like to hear that, but, you know, Frank Warren is very rarely shy about ruffling feathers. So here you can see the announcement poster. Joyce Hrgovic, heavy impact. This was posted by Queensberry on their social media. And as well as this fight being signed, I alluded to this being a possibility on the last live stream, and that is Filip Hrgovic has actually joined Queensberry. You can see here, it says the Croatian also joins the home of the heavyweights. I'm not sure how long this deal with Queensberry will be. Maybe Frank Warren in an interview this week will give us some details on that. But it just shows that Matchroom's days in the heavyweight division are not only numbered, they're over. They got Anthony Joshua, who's completely shot and washed up at this stage. They've got Tera Moana, Justice Hooney, and who else at heavyweight? Nobody? Or what, Johnny Fisher? Come on. In terms of anyone who could actually do anything, they've just lost Filip Hrgovic, it would seem, if we're reading the right things into the comment or the text here on the announcement poster for this fight. So, here it is. You got Joyce, Filip Hrgovic. Joyce, 39 years of age now. He's lost several fights, 3 fights to be exact. Hrgovic just has the one loss to Daniel Dubois. Hrgovic is significantly younger at 32 years of age. Joyce 16-3-0, Hrgovic 17-1. Now, I said previously that I expect this to be a better fight, a more difficult fight for Joyce. I was picking him to beat Dillian Whyte. I'm not so confident of picking him to beat Filip Hrgovic, but it's contingent on the type of shape that Hrgovic is in. From what I've heard people say online, or read people say online, to be more accurate, there are some saying that Hrgovic has actually been in training for several months. Maybe not full scale training or full on training because he didn't have a fight date, but still ticking over in the gym. I heard that he's switched coaches from Ronnie Shields to Abel Sanchez. I think that's a good move. I think Abel Sanchez is a much better trainer than Ronnie Shields. Ronnie Shields, well, let me not even go there. Perhaps we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But yeah, I think that's a good move. Abel Sanchez did say that he was going to retire from training and sell his gym in Big Bear and whatnot, but it seems like boxing has lured him back if he is training Filip Hrgovic, because he did actually train Arslan. Is it Arslan or is it, I forget his first name now, but Gulamarian, the guy who Ramirez beat for the cruiserweight title. Abel Sanchez was in his corner that night. So yeah, he has been lured back by a couple fighters, and I think it might be a good fit for Filip Hrgovic to be training with Abel Sanchez. Abel Sanchez likes his fighters to be aggressive. Hrgovic is a naturally aggressive fighter. He has the aggressive instincts of somebody who knows they can take a shot. But that, of course, can be a double-edged sword, because you can, on one hand, overwhelm people when you take chances and, you know, he who dares wins. But at the same time, you can become reckless and get hit with too many shots, as he did against Daniel Dubois. You know, trusting his chin and believing that in a war of attrition, he would come out on top. But it was actually Dubois who came out on top. Hrgovic made a very good start, for sure. But he overdid it, trying to blast Dubois out, and left himself gassed. Ended up getting cut. He was tired, and then he got stopped. And what was it, round 8, round 9? Something like that. He needs to fight a more disciplined and a more educated fight against Joyce. Joyce, of course, the man who beat Daniel Dubois. And you know what boxing is like? Rock, paper, scissors. Just because Daniel Dubois beat Hrgovic and Joyce beat Dubois, it doesn't mean that Hrgovic can't beat Joyce. Now, for those of you who are not aware, I have mentioned this before, these two actually have history. They fought each other in the WSB, the World Series of Boxing, back around 2013. You can see the thumbnail here on screen. The video is still up on YouTube. I encourage you to watch it. It was a very good scrap. Joe Joyce won the fight on points on a split decision. Okay, now, some people will argue that this was a much younger, well, it certainly was a much younger, fresher version of Joyce, and therefore, he was able to do things back then that he can't do now. And I would concur with that. Joe Joyce was actually faster, and it's hard for him to be slower than he is right now, but he was significantly faster back then. His feet were faster, his hands were faster, and he fought at a higher pace. He was a much younger man, of course. And I think he was in his late 20s, he would have been. Hrgovic maybe in his late teens, early 20s. And that's another thing that you have to consider, is the fact that Hrgovic back then maybe wasn't at his peak physically because of the fact he was very, very young. Some people don't peak until they're, and I'm talking about your athletic and strength peak. Some people might not reach their peak till they're in their mid-20s or even into their early 30s. So it remains to be seen if Hrgovic peaked back then or he's peaked in his mid-20s or maybe peaking now. We shall see. But yeah, I think this is a very good fight, an interesting fight. If Hrgovic is in shape, then this is maybe the way back for him to the big leagues. Because if he goes in there and does a number on Joe Joyce, you have to imagine he's right back in the mix, especially after signing with Frank Warren. Warren's going to want to match him against, a big name out there. And once the belts become fragmented, once Usyk has had his 2 final fights, and he might relinquish his belts after his next fight if he wins it, because he said that his final fight is just going to be a show fight, an exhibition basically. So you don't need all of your belts in order to fight an exhibition, do you? So yeah, the belts could get fractured and scattered sooner than we realize. And you could have a Filip Hrgovic, a Moses Itauma, Joseph Parker, Ajit Kabayel. Frank Warren's got a plethora of heavyweights right now. And funny thing is, since we're talking about boxing leagues and tournaments and all this type of stuff, that Dana White and Turki Al-Sheikh have launched, well, think about how big Frank Warren's heavyweight stable is. He could have a heavyweight tournament all by himself, an in-house Queensberry heavyweight tournament, and it would be fire. He doesn't even need to involve fighters, heavyweights from other promotional companies. He could have an in-house Queensberry heavyweight tournament, and you're talking about pay-per-view level stuff. It would be fantastic. Frank Warren, aside from Usyk, of course, controls the heavyweight division. He's got damn near everybody that is anybody. For the most part, anyway, right? There's a couple of stragglers here and there, but he's got most of them. So, yeah, think of that as a possibility. Frank Warren doing a heavyweight tournament. So, let me know what you guys think about this fight in the comments. Joe Joyce versus Filip Hrgovic. How do you see this one going? Do you think it's going to be a repeat of their fight in the World Series of Boxing? I think in some ways it will be, personally, in terms of the action, because you got 2 guys who have good chins, especially Hrgovic, and neither one of them is afraid to let their hands go. Neither guy is shy, are they? They both like to get stuck in. So I can't imagine it will be anything other than a really good fight. I think that Joe Joyce is probably the physically stronger of the two. He's certainly the heavier. Both guys are around 6'6", so, the height is going to be similar. I think Joyce might have a slight reach advantage, but don't quote me on that. So I think it's going to be bombs away in this heavyweight fight, April 5th. Very much look forward to it. This card has stood strong because people were concerned, understandably, when Dillian Whyte pulled out with that bizarre injury to his finger. Right? It was a bad injury, but bizarre. People were concerned, and even more so when Lawrence Okolie pulled out of the Richard Riakporhe fight. But yeah, Filip Hrgovic has stepped in, and it's a better main event than the original one, as far as I'm concerned. And of course, on the undercard, you've got a number of fights. Moses Atama, by the way, is fighting on the undercard now. The opponent has not yet been announced, but he will be on the undercard according to Frank Warren, probably in a run-out. You've got David Adeleye, of course, on the undercard as well against Jamie TKV. If I haven't mentioned this previously, this will now be for the vacant British heavyweight title. Yeah, not just the English heavyweight title, as it says on the graphic on screen, but the British heavyweight title, because Fabio Wardley has vacated in order to pursue a WBA regular title shot against Kubrat Pulev. All right? Now, moving on from this card, you've also got a heavyweight fight taking place on the same day, later on that day, in the United States. And this is an interesting one. It's between unbeaten Richard Torrez, 12-0, and Guido Vianello, an Italian heavyweight who is 13-2-1. He's got losses on his record to Jonathan Rice, who's kind of a useful, high-level journeyman, I would say, Jonathan Rice, and Efe Ajagba, who he lost to on points. And Vianello, if you haven't seen him, is a tough guy. He's durable. He does have some ability. Some people think that he deserved to win the Ajagba fight. Others say, no, he lost because he kind of took his foot off the gas later on in the fight. Whereas Richard Torrez Jr., unbeaten, he's been moved very slowly so far in his career by his promoter Top Rank. This fight against Vianello very much represents a step up for him. Okay, 25 years of age, former Olympian, fought Bakadir Jalilov at least 2 times in the amateurs. The first time they fought, he got starched, knocked out cold. The second time, he managed to go the distance, but he lost as well. That to me shows improvement, and that to me shows that he is able to get in there against the guy who knocked him cold and not be too intimidated, because he did give it a go. He tried to be a bit more technical in their rematch. Now, in yesterday's live stream, there was somebody, I think it was Matt, saying that Richard Torrez is basically a hype job. He's no good, and he's not going to go anywhere. He won't win a world title or be one of the top heavyweights in years to come. And he might turn out to be right, but when it comes to a guy like Vianello, personally, although some people are picking Vianello for the upset here, and I guess it would be an upset with the bookies, I think that Richard Torrez should have enough to get past this guy. I can understand the hesitation to pick Torrez because of the fact he's been kind of coddled up to this point. Those of us who saw the first Jalilov fight, we can't get those scenes out of our heads, right? When he was stretched out on the canvas out cold. And he does fight in a kind of amateurish way still, Richard Torrez. He's very green, very raw, very excitable in the ring. He comes in, he throws a lot of shots, maybe doesn't think about what he's doing before he does it. But that's against a certain level of opponent. He knows Vianello is the best fighter he's fought so far as a professional. And he has an extensive amateur background, Richard Torrez. I think they both do. So when he needs to be sensible, I suspect he can do it, because he would have had to have done it in the amateurs. He certainly did it in the Jalilov rematch, although that was only a 3-round fight. This fight will probably go the distance. I don't think he'll stop Vianello unless he manages to get him with a particularly good body shot, or if he manages to cut him or something like that. I expect this one to go the full, well, it doesn't say how many rounds it is on BoxRec yet, the full 10, the full 12. I expect it to go the distance. But I do think that Torrez will be a little too quick and a little bit too busy for Vianello, and he'll get his hand raised. But again, let me know what you guys think about this fight in the chat. Do you think that Torrez is going to come unstuck here already? It'll be his 13th fight? Or do you, like me, think he does have enough to at least get past a guy like Vianello, who's tough, but relatively limited? So, I'm going to throw it over to the chat. All right, we got the usual suspects in the chat. Big up Matt Early with a super chat. He says Richard Torrez will get rid of Vianello. people credit his win against that Russian Terminator hype job when it was a terrible win. I guess you're talking about, God, what's the guy's name now who was stopped by Ajit Kabayel? Forgotten his name. The guy who's based, the Russian guy who's based in Canada. Can't believe, Makhmudov, excuse me. Arslanbek Makhmudov, yeah. Vianello stopped Makhmudov, and in hindsight, I agree with you, it doesn't seem to be such an amazing win. Shout out to Luca. Says, loving these lives, listening to them at work to drown out my colleagues talking nonsense in the office. All right, glad I can be of service, sir. Negroes for Trump says, hope he steamrolls the Croat. I guess he's talking about Joyce. Callum, big up. Says, last chance saloon for Joyce, but this is a good fight. It is too. Big up High Roll Protagonist. Big up Anthony YouTube. All right. A lot of people listening at work. Shout out to Oscar. He says, hello, Hatman. I kind of want to see this fight. Hope all is well with you, sir. Greetings from Bucharest. Shout out to Oscar. Jordan says, I bet Joyce was gutted when his replacement is better than his original opponent. Well, because Joyce beat him in the WSB, he might be confident of beating him in the pros. And of course, he also beat Daniel Dubois, who beat Filip Hrgovic as well. So we might see it differently to the way Joyce sees it, if that makes sense. Our perception is that it's a tougher fight, but in Joyce's mind, it might not be. Who knows, right? Because again, he's got a win over the guy, and he beat the guy who beat him. Shout out to Ocean Blue. Shout out to Beast LFC. Ocean Blue says, I think this is a better outcome. Joyce against Hrgovic, and maybe the Chisora White trilogy. Yeah, I like the trilogy fight for Derek Chisora with Dylan White. Shout out to Feed Khabib. Another super chat from Matt. He says, I hate Richard Torrez because every time he has gotten hurt, he literally causes injuries. He almost lost the fight because he used his head. Which fight in particular did he do that in? I'm interested to see where Richard Torrez got hurt. I don't recall seeing him get hurt in a pro fight. So please tell me which fight it was so I can go watch it. Because, as I say, I'd be very interested to see what he did in those fights. Stats Killer says Anderson and Torrez are hype jobs. Okay, this guy's taking a big dump on the top-ranked heavyweight prospects. Feed Khabib says, who is paying to watch Joyce versus Hrgovic? Both are so washed up. Only in the UK could this headline a show like this. I'm not sure why you would think that Hrgovic is washed up. He's only lost one fight. He's in his early 30s, but I guess time will tell. I don't think he's washed up at all. I think he's got plenty left in the tank. Again, a relatively young man in heavyweight terms, 31, 32 years of age, and just the one defeat. So he should be pretty fresh. Fee Khabib says Joyce versus Atama was the fight to make. Shout out to Matt again. He says Torrez is a very, very sloppy fighter. Smothers his work, inaccurate, took him 8 rounds to get rid of a 400-pound man who threw 2 punches out of a fight. Yeah, I saw, I think, some of the fight that you're talking about. And he is reckless. He will smother his work. He's just over-enthusiastic, over-exuberant. He's like a kid still. Even though he's 25, he kind of fights like an over-enthusiastic amateur. But as I say, in the rematch he had with Jalilov in the Olympics, he fought more sensibly. So I've seen him be able to be sensible in a fight. And so I have to imagine that against Vianello, we might see it again. They'll fight a bit more sensibly. Mr. Lucas says Bricktop mugging off Hearn. I guess that is in reference to the fact that Bricktop has now signed Hrgovic as well. Or is it something else? Antoine says, unrelated topic, Hatman, is Errol Spence done? In my opinion, yes. Stick a fork in him, he's done. Shout out to Fight Sport Talk. Krasen says Hrgovic's poor stamina can lose him this fight because Joyce will be all over him. That's a good comment. Now, personally, I don't think Hrgovic has got bad stamina. I think the issue is that he doesn't pace himself correctly because he tends to come out and start very, very fast in fights. He did it certainly against Daniel Dubois. He also did it when he fought Dempsey McKean. You go back and watch that fight, Hrgovic came out like a bull in a china shop, throwing millions and millions of right hands, thinking he was going to get McKean out of there early. He obviously didn't, and then he kind of gassed in the mid-rounds before finding his second win late and stopping McKean in the final round. So that tends to be the pattern with Hrgovic, is he punches himself out by just throwing too many. He needs to learn to pace himself better. If he can pace himself more sensibly, I reckon he can do the rounds. I mean, he did go the distance against Zheli Zhang. So I'm not saying he's got the greatest stamina in the world, but I don't think he's got, terrible stamina. It's just a pacing issue. I mean, in the early rounds against Daniel Dubois, he was literally throwing damn near 100 punches around in some of the early rounds. For a heavyweight, that's insane, throwing 100 punches around, okay? That's the kind of work rate that you come with if you think you're going to get, if you think you're going to get a guy out of there early. If you're convinced you're going to take him out early, that's when you start throwing 100 punches around. I'll give you an example. El Perro, I forget his actual name now, the Mexican fighter who got smashed to bits by Canelo and beat James Kirkland. God, what's his name? El Perro. Please assist my fading memory here in the live chat. El Perro, what was his name? The Mexican fighter who fought Canelo and stopped James Kirkland in a hell of a slugfest. El Perro, what's his name? Anyone? No one's telling me what El Perro's name is. I've forgotten his name. Can't believe it. El Perro means the dog, right? In Spanish. Angulo. Thank you, Gokugi. Yes, Alfredo Angulo. So some of you may remember when... Angulo got beaten by Kirkland, didn't he? Yeah, that was a good example, actually. Alfredo Angulo didn't have bad stamina. He had pretty good stamina. But against James Kirkland, he came out like a bull in a china shop. He hurt Kirkland in the first round. And he just threw everything at him and gassed out. And then he ended up getting stopped by Kirkland, which is pretty embarrassing because Kirkland was terrible. But that's an example of what I'm talking about. Some fighters just sell out early, and empty the tank, and they've got nothing left for the rest of the fight. And that's what Filip Hrgovic tends to do. So he's going to need to pace himself better in this fight. Shout out to Matt again for the super chat. He says, Curtis Harper versus Torrez, 90% sure. I'm sure I saw some of that fight. I maybe didn't see the whole thing. So I'm definitely going to go back and watch that to see this moment that you're talking about where Torrez gets hurt. I'll definitely look out for that. KS says, how do you see the Adelaide TKV fight going, Hatman? I see David Adelaide winning, for sure. Jamie TKV hasn't really shown much in his pro fights, if I'm being honest. He's shown himself to be somewhat durable. In the fight that he lost, I think he actually got stopped in a cut in that fight against the Brazilian heavyweight. He took a hell of a lot of stick and didn't go down, at least not as far as I can remember. So he's shown himself to be durable, TKV, but limited. There's a lot of talk of him performing very well in sparring, but unless you can translate that form to the pro ring, then it's not going to mean anything, and he hasn't done it so far. Fee Khabib says, I thought Hrgovic was like 38. How is that Emma for 32? Yeah. He's only in his early 30s. He's a young guy still, in heavyweight terms. So yeah, I've got Adelaide beating TKV. I'm not sure if he'll stop him, but I definitely think he'll beat him. If TKV does win, it might be a late round job where Adelaide maybe gasses out. Has Adelaide actually been the distance? Let me check now if Adelaide's been... When I say the distance, I'm talking about like 10 rounds. Let's have a look here. David Adelaide. I'm just looking at his box rec. Where are we at? Pretty sure he hasn't been the distance, has he? No. The longest he's been in a fight was 7 rounds when he was stopped by Fabio Wardley. So he hasn't been the distance. And, yeah, this one against Jamie TKV is scheduled for 10. So let's see how Adelai's stamina holds up. But I think he's the more talented fighter. I think he's the better puncher. And he's been in with a better opposition, obviously, as a pro. So, yeah, I got Adelai in this one. Fee Khabib says, James Kirtland and Ann Wolfe. The hype was crazy. Mini Mike Tyson. Yeah, James Kirtland was really a terrible fighter. I remember when he got knocked out in 1 round by that Japanese guy. You guys remember that? There was some random Japanese guy, tall Japanese guy, who did James Kirtland in 1 round. I think Munguia might have fought him at some point. Did Munguia fight him? Roz B says, are people saying this is a better fight because it's a better opponent or because they think it will be more competitive? I think Dylan would have been more competitive. Hrgovic, tough fight. I disagree. I think Joe Joyce would have dealt with Dylan White comfortably, to be honest. Based upon Dylan White's last couple of fights, he looked terrible. Absolutely terrible against Ebenezer Tete. Tete is supposed to be 35. I'm telling you, he's not. The man's closer to 50, and I'm being very serious. Dylan White couldn't put a dent in Tete. Tete was energized by how poor Dylan White was. He was fighting with vigor in there because Dylan White was so poor, because his punches were having no effect on Tete. Tete got blasted out in a round by Daniel Dubois years ago. And there's Dylan White damn near going life and death with him. I think Dylan White is completely finished. His performance against Christian Hammer, was pretty shoddy as well. And prior to that, he fought Jermaine Franklin, I think was the fight prior to that. He didn't look good there either. So I think Dylan White is completely finished. I think Joe Joyce would have done a number on him. Hrgovic, on the other hand, I think is far more competitive, far more difficult for Joyce. I'm not saying it's unwinnable, but I think it's far more difficult. And I think it will be far more entertaining as well, because Dylan White is as slow as molasses. Imagine Joyce is slow, Dylan White's slow, extremely slow these days. It would have been an ugly spectacle, probably. Hrgovic at least has some level of hand speed and foot speed to him. And he'll certainly look fast next to Joe Joyce, trust me. Neuro Scream says, Torrez, if nothing else, very entertaining. Just need to listen to some synthwave and you can feel the 80s again. Yeah, he's got the 80s curly perm too, right? I'm a big 80s man. I grew up in the 80s. So I love the synthwave and all that type of stuff. In fact, I'll be coming out with some synthwave, so watch this space. Oh, yes. Reality's Awakened now says, Torrez, but he rushes too much and takes too many hits. I'm sure he'll get knocked out as soon as he steps up. Well, this is a step up of sorts against Vianello. Vianello will be by far the best opponent he's fought so far as a pro. If I can kindly request that everyone watching this stream, we've got 194 concurrent viewers, just stick a like on it for me, please. It really helps visibility. It helps these streams get seen and not get buried by the YouTube algorithm. So if we can get at least 100 likes, it'll be much appreciated. It only takes a split second of your time. Thank you in advance. Kyle says Moses looks 35. Yeah, I hear some people say that. To me, he doesn't look in his 30s, but, you know, other people think he does. I don't see it myself. Oscar says, does Hrgovic maybe think he hits harder than he does? Could that be one of the reasons he paces himself wrong sometimes? Yes, would be the answer. In my opinion, that's absolutely the case with Filip Hrgovic. He thinks he hits harder than he actually does. That's why he goes out there like a madman, trying to chin people in one round when he should be breaking them down gradually, boxing his way into the fight. I think it's exactly what it is. Filip Hrgovic is a very alpha personality. Kind of like, I mean, he's not as much of a trash talker as Jarrell Miller, but he has that kind of Ivan Drago arrogance about him, Filip Hrgovic. And, very, very alpha. And he goes in there with that kind of alpha mentality, thinking he's the best at everything, probably. Thinking he's got the best skills in every department and also the biggest puncher. But he's not. And he has to come to terms with that reality. Maybe he has after the loss to Daniel Dubois. Time will tell. But I absolutely concur with Oscar. Hrgovic thinks he hits harder than he actually does. Fee Khabib says, I remember the Canelo-Kirtland build-up. That was a public execution. Yeah, Canelo beat the brakes off that boy. Shout out to Matt again for another super chat. He says, I don't think Joyce can beat any heavyweight at this point. Any heavyweight? As in any heavyweight in the world? I imagine you mean any heavyweight in the top 10 maybe, or top 15. I think he can beat Dillian Whyte. Personally, I was picking Joyce to beat Whyte quite comfortably. Maybe not stop him, although I think he does have the power to stop Whyte because Whyte's got no chin these days. But outbox him. Fee Khabib mentioning Seth Mitchell. Yeah, Jonathan Banks did away with him. Jonathan Banks tucked him right in. You guys remember that? Jonathan Banks did away with the Seth Mitchell hype. Seth Mitchell was a football player, right? American football, gridiron. Crescent says Vianello is not a bad fighter. Yeah, he's kind of a solid fringe contender. He's tough. He showed he had a chin when he fought Efe Ajagba. Efe Ajagba can crack. And Vianello showed he had a chin in that fight. Right, shout out to, is it Stragingness? Got a mad name, bro. Yo, Hatman. What's going on? Or Wagwan? Hey, either or, bro. Shout out to Boxer. He said, I don't believe Joyce is finished yet. Okay. Man thinks that Joyce has still got some gas left in the tank. We shall see. The big juggernaut. Maybe he's refueled at a petrol station. We'll find out April 5th. Will he give Filip Hrgovic more than he can handle? Stats Killer says Fisher is an even bigger fraud than Anderson and Torrez. I mean, I don't tend to use words like fraud and stuff like that. Or when I do, I use them in a very pointed and specific way where I qualify the statement first. Fraud would imply that people are buying into, or a significant amount of people are buying into, the idea that Johnny Fisher is some type of world-level talent, because that's how Eddie Hearn tried to market him after the Alan Babbage fight particularly. He's a world-level prospect. I never bought into it, and my perception was that most hardcore boxing fans didn't buy into it. Maybe I don't spend enough time looking at what the casuals are saying. Maybe a lot of them were buying into it. And if that is the case, then maybe you could justifiably call him a fraud if the majority of people out there believe that he is something special. But I never believed he was anything special, and I don't think most of my subscribers did. They saw him as an Essex ticket seller. Nothing against Johnny Fisher. I don't want to come and sound like I'm being malicious towards him or something. I got no personal issue with Johnny Fisher whatsoever, okay? But just as a boxing fan, observing him, the way he fights, you know, his ability and whatnot, I don't see much there. I don't see much there. He's got a bit of hand speed and power. He's rough and ready, but he's so crude. He's so amateurish, novice-y. It's going to take years before they can put this guy in with anyone with a pulse, in my opinion. So, yeah, I don't personally like using words like that, but, you know, if you want to use it, that's on you. That's cool. But personally, I try and see things in shades of gray rather than in black and white where I can, you know? Shout out to Matt again. He says, also, if Derek wins against you, you are not top 15 material. Dylan White, feed Dylan White to Derek. Yeah, the thing about Derek Chisora is that he's better than advertised. Yeah, we know he's been beaten 13 times, I think it is now. But, when he goes up against the right style and he's switched on and he's motivated for a fight, he can basically get wins above his level occasionally. I mean, I would say at the time, Carlos Takam was a win above his level. He got battered by Carlos Takam. Takam was dominating the fight. That's one of the worst beatings I've ever seen Derek Chisora take for the first, whatever it was, 5-6 rounds. And then he comes out with a punch from the gods, literally from the gods, and flattens Carlos Takam, totally against the run of play. So, yeah, Joe Joyce, I thought, boxed a very poor fight against Chisora. I thought he was going to win. I thought he was going to box a similar fight to the one he did against Daniel Dubois. Not that Chisora is as good as Dubois, but or not that Joyce is as good as he was back then, should I say, when he fought Dubois now. But I thought, as slow as Derek Chisora's feet are these days, Joyce could just use his jab at long range, not try get too ambitious, pepper Chisora with the jab and soften him up a bit, and then maybe try to push the issue later on in the fight. But instead, Joyce tried to engage in a slugfest, which was basically the only way that Derek Chisora could win. And that's what Joe Joyce did. Shout out to First Round Boxing. Shout out to Matt. And I think Matt has summed it up there. He says, outside of Essex, no one rates Fisher. I reckon that's about accurate. That's the perception I have anyway. That Fisher is just an Essex ticket seller. But outside of Essex, is anyone really paying him much attention? That's a question for you guys. Death Stare says White is the most shot fighter in the game at the moment. He's definitely up there when it comes to heavyweights. Marquez says Fisher Sr.'s blood type is rock and roll. Matt says Fisher is area level at best. All right, man's saying that the whole Star Wars analogy you did on boxing's current stars is still stuck in my head. The dark side and the light side are very real things. Yeah, and Usyk brought balance to the force. That's what he did. You had man like Tyson Fury on the dark side. Who is Tyson Fury? Darth Vader? The Emperor? He's one of them Sith characters, right? Tyson Fury. And Deontay Wilder as well was Sith. And Usyk came along literally like Luke Skywalker to bring balance to the force. A Reality's Awakened now says, Johnny Fisher owes me money. I placed the bet on Dave Allen and got robbed. Well, they're going to run it back. Fee Khabib says Fisher's dad has eaten so much Chinese, he did one of those genetic testing, it came back 50% Asian. Very good. Very good. So I've added some more video footage to the footage on screen you can see. Hopefully you guys enjoy it. It's nice and tranquil for you. Me doing some laps of the pool. Lamps of the pool, should I say. Luke Partridge, says Lennox. Gorguga says Joyce is an actual artistic painter. Unusual hobby for a boxer. Well, you'd be surprised the kind of hobbies that boxers have. Joyce is also a gamer. Like a PC gamer. A pretty hardcore one. So he plays that as well. Keith Thurman plays the flute. He sits cross-legged and what do they call him in that video? The bird whisperer? Dave P says, where is Bakadir Jalilov? He's been so inactive, another top-ranked heavyweight. Yeah, he was supposed to fight a few weeks ago, but he pulled out with an injury, and it was only a run-out as well against the journeyman, so no idea what's going on with him. It's very disappointing. Really needs to get a move on. Shout out to Mr. Luca for the super chat. He says, top 32 knockout heavyweight tournament would be great. Yeah, and it would be mostly Frank Warren fighters, wouldn't it? Frank Warren owns virtually the entire heavyweight division. Jimbo Jones says, Joe Joyce has one of the most poorly managed careers I've ever seen. The Zhang fight was the most unnecessary risk. A hard-hitting southpaw for a man with no defense. Well, Joyce was managed early on in his career by, I think originally by David Hay, and then Sam Jones, and then more recently, Adam Morley. I think for the Zhang fights, Adam Morley was his manager, not Sam Jones. So, yeah, Adam Morley not doing a good job, I guess. You know, when you are a mandatory, you should not feel obligated to continue taking on tough opposition. You've already worked your way to the mandatory spot by beating tough guys. You don't need to carry on doing it. Have a few run-outs and wait for your shot. I've got no problem with fighters doing that. Now, if they want to risk it, okay. But their management should probably be advising them against it, you know? Yes, Mark. Laughing at the Keith Thurman, the bird whisperer. Yeah, Keith Thurman plays some kind of flute thing. A wooden flute, or is it a recorder? I'm not sure the exact name of the instrument, but I remember him cross-legged, sitting on some grass in a video with a tie-dye t-shirt on, playing the flute. And it was like Keith Thurman, the bird whisperer. Thurman's like a hippie, you know? That's why he went out to Nepal or wherever it is and married that woman. He's like married to some Nepalese woman. He was probably backpacking out there, you know? On some spiritual journey like Ralph Smart or something. Shout out to Ralph Smart. Peace, Infinite Waters, diving deep once again. He cracks me up with them little catchphrases. Shout out to Matt again. He says, let me tell you, the biggest hype job in boxing right now is Ben Whittaker. In the Cameron rematch, I have Cameron. This is why TikTok is bad. We shall see. He's taken the rematch. I wasn't convinced by this injury story in the first fight. Personally, my opinion is, my best guess at least, is that he did quit for whatever reason. Shout out to Bexy. He says, Hatman, do you reckon Dana will hit boxing like a bull in a china shop? Not really. I think it's going to be a slow burn I could be wrong, but I think it's going to be a slow burn. Trying to take boxing over. They've got very lofty ambitions. And yes, they've got the money, but in order to pull that particular model off in boxing, they're not going to be able to pay such small purses as they do in UFC. They're going to have to pay a lot more than that, I think, in order to get boxers to buy into it. At least the big names, right? Shout out to Matt again. He says, also, what's up with Turkey's taste in matchups? I feel like he's one of those old guys who thinks Lady Gaga is still popular. He's 10 years behind. Well, it's a cultural thing. Yeah, it's a cultural thing. When I lived in the Middle East, whenever it was, 15 years ago, I was talking to like young Arab guys and whatnot, and they had no idea who Jay-Z and Beyonce were. See, sometimes in the West, we tend to think that the whole world, because, you know, we're told that this is the biggest artist in the world and this is the highest selling artist and blah, blah, blah. So in the West, we tend to think that everybody in the world knows as much about our popular culture as we do, when that's actually not the case. You know, when I lived out in the Middle East, they were following all these celebrities and public figures from places like Turkey and other Islamic countries, Egypt, you know, actors and actresses from Egypt, and as I say, singers from Turkey who, you know, we who grew up in the West, we don't know them. So it's a different world. And yes, when it comes to the Arabs, a lot of them are behind when it comes to Western culture. They think that artists and actors and so on who were hot 10, 15, 20 years ago are still hot now because they're only just finding out about them in some cases. So, yeah, I think that's what's going on, exactly what's going on with Turkey. He's behind because he's immersed in his own culture, in Arab culture, which is different. They have different stars, different, you know, actors and all that type of business that they follow. And I think that's why, for example, we had Eminem on the LA show rather than a more relevant rapper like, I don't know, a Drake or, what's the guy now? Kendrick Lamar or somebody like that, who's more relevant to today's rap audience. I don't listen to those artists, but again, if you're trying to be relevant, you would go with them rather than an Eminem. But because Turkey and Arabs in general are kind of behind with regards to Western culture, they're in their own culture, you know? That's something that I realized when I started traveling and whatnot, that not everyone knows about Western culture the way we assume they do. Just as we know nothing about theirs, right? Another one from Matt, he says, Turkey doesn't want Benavidez Bivol. Like, WTF, it's clear to me it's related to the fact Benavidez has a WBC strap. I don't think it's to do with the WBC strap. Personally, I might be wrong because there seems to be like a little Cold War starting between Turkey Al-Sheikh and the WBC. It could be that. But you have to remember that Dimitri Bivol is WBC champion, right? So Benavidez is only interim champion. He's got no issue putting Dimitri Bivol fights on, right? Turkey Al-Sheikh. I suspect what it is an issue with PBC because Turkey wanted Benavidez to fight the winner of Beterbiev Bivol before they had their rematch. He openly said that that's the fight he wanted to see. He said that's the fight he was going to make. And Benavidez was interim champion then with the WBC. So why change his mind? I think behind the scenes, PBC are being difficult in negotiations. I think at this stage, Turkey's basically telling people, look, your guys are going to fight on my shows. I'm going to bankroll the whole thing and I'm going to air it on DAZN. This is the way it's going to be, my way or the highway. And I suspect PBC, Al Heyman have told Turkey, no, we're not doing that. And because, you know, Al Heyman and PBC are being stubborn, Turkey's like, okay, fine. We'll forget about giving Benavidez a shot at Bivol. We're going to go in a different direction. I suspect that's the reason that Turkey has said what he said. I don't think it's necessarily to do with the WBC. That's my best guess anyway. Shout out to Matt. Shout out to James Clifford for the super chat. He says, are we rushing the careers of British heavyweights these days? Back in the day, Bruno and certainly Lennox Lewis were given progressive learning fights. I don't think it's just heavyweights, to be honest. I think many fighters in the UK are rushed. And I think the precedent was set with Anthony Joshua. Anthony Joshua was completely rushed by Matchroom. And he made so much money so quickly that it basically set the blueprint that Matchroom have tried to follow with other fighters. You know, to be fair, Frank Warren doesn't do that so much. He's more of a guy that likes to go the traditional route of his fighters with most of them. But Eddie Hearn certainly has rushed a lot of his fighters because of the success he had with Anthony Joshua, because he thinks like a businessman more than a developer of talent. Frank Warren thinks more like a boxing man, whereas Eddie Hearn thinks more like a businessman. Yeah, Evil Uncle Phil summed it up well there. He said, yeah, most fighters are rushed because promoters want their return on investment, more so Hearn. Yeah, they think like businessmen, the Hearns. And of course, boxing is a business, but if you're wise, you're going to develop your product for longer. Whereas Eddie Hearn and his dad Barry are trying to rush the product to the shelf with some pretty packaging on it. The packaging looks great, but the actual product inside hasn't been developed correctly. Whereas Frank Warren, maybe the packaging ain't as pretty, but he's going to take his time developing the actual product. Now, somebody mentioned Sexy Red. Yeah, them rappers are horrible. The female ones are even worse than the male ones these days. Yeah, horrible. Shout out to Matt for the super chat. He says, AJ sold out the O2 versus Gary Cornish. They cashed in ASAP. Yeah, he went from Gary Cornish to Dylan White to challenging for the heavyweight title against Charles Martin. Couple fights later, he's in with Klitschko. Shout out to Matt for the super chat. He says, PBC lost a lot of money with their signing of Tim Tszyu. Feel bad for them. How much money did they spend on Tim Tszyu? That's the thing. I mean, PBC are in dire straits in general right now. They have very few dates, and that's where all the money comes from. TV companies. Obviously, Amazon are not short for money. They're one of the biggest companies in the world, but how much are they willing to pay? See, a lot of these companies that have not dealt with boxing before, they don't like, once they've got their established model and they're making enormous sums of money, they don't like splashing out a load of money and losing money on shows as part of a long-term project, because they've already done that earlier on during the life of their business. They're not trying to go back there. They're trying to be profitable all the time. Do you know what I mean? They got shareholders to answer to and whatnot. Board members and so on and so forth. See, Evil Uncle Phil has summed it up again perfectly. He said, protect your investment instead of cashing it out or casting it out. If Ben loses twice to Eubank Jr., where does he go from there? Finished. Not that good. Not that he was good, but yeah. Yeah, it's like the Matchroom philosophy is a cash grab. It's like they're always looking to make fast money instead of long money. It's always short-term thinking with Matchroom. Even Uncle Phil says I meant cashing out, yeah. Yeah, they're always looking for a smash and grab. That's what Matchroom are all about, smash and grab. And I suspect that this business philosophy was passed down from from Barry to his son Eddie. Completely agree with Ayed. They were matching Conor Benn well, but ruined it. Yeah. He was on a very good trajectory at 147, but they decided to go in a completely different direction with a weird fight against Eubank Jr. Again, all about the short term, the smash and grab. Stats Killer says Hearn probably won't be long in boxing anymore. I suspect you're right. And I think the pivotal moment in Eddie Hearn's career will be when Anthony Joshua retires. He may call it a day very shortly after that. He might hand over the reins to Frank Smith very briefly, but I can't imagine that Frank Smith will last long. Encircled says, would you agree that in hindsight the Martin fight was a mistake for AJ? Well, I was saying it at the time. I was saying at the time that it's too early for AJ to be challenging for titles. I felt like it was a rush even then, because once you step up to world level, you are obligated to fight a certain level of opponent. And I didn't think he was ready to be making that step at that particular point. Okay, interesting comment from Linkage. He says, I think Hearn knew about Ben drugs. That's why he cashed out Ben. Evil Uncle Phil says, get Frank Smith out of boxing. He can't even pretend to care about it anymore. Yeah, he has long said that he's a businessman. He's not a boxing man. He said Eddie Hearn's a boxing man. Well, Eddie Hearn's barely a boxing man. Yes, he grew up in boxing, but his mindset is money, 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 money. And there's nothing wrong with that when you're a businessman. But what I'm saying is he's so money hungry that actually causes him to make hasty decisions with fighters' careers, which actually curtails, or that's probably not the right word to use, but maybe curtails, cut short their careers of earning. You know, their earning potential is in some cases higher than we end up seeing because Eddie Hearn rushes them because he wants to get cash out of them as quickly as possible rather than taking his time. You know, there's a saying, right? And I'm going to watch my language here. Have any of you seen the movie Colors? It starred Sean Penn and what's his name now? Was it Robert Duvall? I can't remember his name now, but Sean Penn. There was a movie called Colors about gangs in LA. I think it came out in the 80s or early 90s, maybe early 90s. But there's a saying that it's like, you know, two cops that are in LA, South Central or Compton or wherever. And the older one says to the younger one, he says, there's two bulls standing at the top of a hill. And at the bottom of the hill, there's a bunch of cows. And the young bull says to the old bull, hey, Pops, how about we run down the hill and go F one of those cows down there? And Daddy Bull says to his son, no, son, let's walk down and F them all. Right? That's the kind of idea, see? Eddie Hearn's the one who wants to run down and F one of them. Frank Warren's like, no, let's walk down and F them all. Shout out to Matt for the super chat again. He says, Munguia versus Saras must have given his promoter a heart attack. Yeah, that's another one they're running back. They're running that one back. Boxer says, good movie. Yeah, Colors is a good movie. I like the jump-in scene. You know when the Mexican kid gets jumped into the gang? From what I hear, they don't really do jump-ins anymore, or as much as they used to. But back in the 80s and the 90s in the gang scene in LA, they used to have jump-ins, where in order to be initiated into a gang, you have to basically have a fight against several other gang members, like you won against 2 or 3 other men. And if you do well enough against these other guys in a fight, if you last long enough, you're in. I remember for that movie, Ice-T did the title track, Colors. Bexy says the UFC seems to be stale. I agree. Ever since Turkey started investing in boxing, the UFC has become very stale. But let me just check when this Munguia-Saras fight, the rematch, is happening. Jaime Munguia. Let me have a look here. Because I'm sure that's been announced, hasn't it? Munguia-Saras. Okay, it's not on his BoxRec page. Munguia. I could have sworn that fight's been announced. Will Munguia manage to get it back over Bruno Saras? Or will it be repeat rather than revenge? What do you guys think? Strangingness says, I thought Eddie Hearn was Ethan Hawke when him and AJ took off, but this whole time he was Alonzo Harris. That's one of the greatest movies of all time, Training Day. Star Fox says Ice-T starring as Ice-T because that's the only character he can do. We got Sonika Blade in the chat. Shout out to Sonika. Well, you know, there's that famous scene, hilarious scene, in I think it's Law and Order. Is it Law and Order? Where there's that big, like, hench guy. I've never seen the episode. I've just seen the clip. You know the one I'm talking about. The big hench guy is trying to say he's not gay. And he comes out with a bizarre statement, which makes him sound like he's very gay. And Ice-T's like, that means you're gay. Shout out to anyone who knows what I'm referring to. That's a hilarious scene. Shout out to Matt for the super chat. He says, Prime Hearn was great fun. Wolf of Wall Street vibes. Yes, indeed. Leo DiCaprio. He was feeling himself a bit too much, though, wasn't he, Eddie Hearn? Very entertaining and charismatic. But he thought he was invincible. He bought into his own hype. Ocean Blue says, Law and Order SVU. Shout out to Paul Conahan. Michael M says Hearn lost his mojo. Yep. And the pivotal moment, really, when Hearn lost his mojo, when he completely got lost in his own ego, was when he left Sky and did the DAZN deal for the UK. And he was talking about game changed, and he started signing, you know, ridiculous people to his broadcast team like Maya Jama, and yeah, that's when I knew Hearn had lost his mind. I mean, Maya Jama absolutely had it off. the amount she was getting paid per show, she was like, hey, I'll take your money and I'm not even going to stay with DAZN. You're that dumb to pay me this money when I've got loads of other stuff going on in my career. Yeah, I'll take it and then I'll go off sick right away and get paid this crazy salary. Yo, she fleeced Eddie Hearn. And Hearn must have got a dressing down from DAZN after the whole Maya Jama debacle. He must have done. Because she had it right off. Shout out to Danny for the super chat. He says, favorite Doom track or tracks or album? I've never been like a super MF Doom fan, but some of his early tracks I did like, and I like a lot of his beats. So Dead Bent, I like that track. Hey, that was like a white label, I think, or was it a single? Going back to the days of vinyl now. And he released some instrumental albums. I think I've got some of his instrumental albums. One of my favorite MF Doom beats is called Four Thieves Vinegar. Is it Four Thieves Vinegar? Is that? I forget. Let me look it up now. I like that beat. I think it's called Four. Yeah, Four Thieves Vinegar. That's the name of one of MF Doom beats that I really, really like. One of my favorite MF Doom beats, Four Thieves Vinegar. That's to give him, because the name of the instrumental album series he did was like Mixed Herbs or something, or I forget what it's called now. But all the tracks were named after herbs or herbal concoctions. Shout out to the box for the super chat. He says, Parker is overhyped after his last 3 wins. Possibly. We will find out if he fights, let's say, a Alexander Usyk in his next fight, or an Ajit Kabayel. And we'll find out for sure. Ayed says Laura Woods left too. Nafid Khabib says Ade Oladipo is just as bad in my opinion. Him and Dev Sani are terrible. I disagree. I think Ade is very good. I think he's one of the better presenters out there. He's just very natural and relaxed on camera. And I think Ade does his thing. I think he's a good presenter. And he was a YouTuber making boxing videos long before he ever worked for DAZN. And prior to that, he was with Sky briefly, and prior to that he was working for some broadcasters out in Africa. Coppen says Boys in the Hood is an underrated film. Is it underrated? It's very well known and very well liked, so I'm not sure it's underrated, but it's a good film. Shout out to Death Star for the super chat. He says, imagine Brock Lesnar versus Devin Larratt. I've got no idea who Devin Larratt is. Who's he? Trollsabad says Law & Order SUV is 26 seasons. Crazy. Coppen says I miss Ade link up with Ryan. Yep. Their channel was called Box Talk, right? Ade and Ryan. KS says Ade worked his way to where he is, nothing but respect. Yeah, he really did. He grafted and he worked his way. He started out as, a YouTuber making videos with Ryan. And then he was on his own for a bit on YouTube. And then he got a gig doing commentary in Africa, right? In various backwaters in Africa doing boxing commentary. And that landed him a job with Sky. I think this was his journey with Sky, on Sky News at first. I think he might have worked briefly for Sky Sports, but then he was, I think, headhunted by DAZN. I'm not sure if he applied or they headhunted him, but he ended up on DAZN, and he's been the face of DAZN ever since in terms of the broadcast team. Big Spud says, Devin is an arm wrestler. Okay. The greatest arm wrestler ever. Alter Ego says, Paulie Malignaggi is pretty decent at commentating. Yeah, more than decent, I would say. Very good. Strangingness says, Caballero would give Usyk the abdominal crunch treatment, the obliques workout, the gut buster, the dad bod demolition, the spare ribs. You get the idea. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see if he could do that. But I doubt we'll see that fight. I think Usyk has got one foot out the door. Reality's Awakened now says, big up Hatman. Would Mayweather beat Crawford if they fought in their prime? It's a very good fight. Mayweather was faster. Crawford was more of a finisher, a closer, switch hitter. Both got great boxing brains. I reckon that would have been a very, 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 very close fight. Could go either way. I want to say Mayweather on a split. Fee Khabib says, no MMA guy can box to a high level, nowhere near it. I'll put a caveat on that and say, as long as the high-level fighter is actually taking it seriously. Because we saw what happened when Ngannou fought Tyson Fury. Fury didn't take it seriously and he nearly got beat. Mark Hatch says, Usyk retiring at the right time to not get drafted. Well, I think he means too much to the establishment of his country to draft him or anything like that. It's like Joe Louis during World War II. Yeah, he didn't actually partake in any fighting in World War II, Joe Louis. The American government, for propaganda purposes, just like they did with Usyk and Lomachenko, they made out as though Joe Louis was out there and, doing his bit. But really, he was just like boxing exhibitions for the troops. He wasn't on the front line doing any real fighting. He was like a mascot for the war effort. And he meant more to the American government at the time to be used in that way than actually, have him fighting. And same goes for Alexander Usyk. He means more as a mascot for the country than, to be sending him out there and putting him in any real danger. Linkage says, but Ali got drafted. Yeah, but Ali was anti-establishment. He was anti-establishment, so he was different. He wasn't someone that agreed with what the establishment was doing publicly, He was against Vietnam. And that might be why he actually got drafted. Because he would never allow himself to be used as a mascot for the war effort. So they were like, we'll show him. Reality's Awakened now says Hatman is not speaking Russian anymore. He always did before. Yeah, there's pressures, Pressures. Because at the start of that whole thing, I was told, I don't know whether this is true, but I was told that he was actually on the Russian side, because the part of the country that he's from is the part that's being contested, isn't it? He's actually from there. And he was, as I say, his first language is Russian, not Ukrainian. But again, for PR purposes, now he's speaking Ukrainian rather than Russian. Shout out to Vincent for the super chat. He says Usyk is going to have a long career in boxing. You think he's going to go on for several more years? Despite saying that he is only going to have 2 more fights? I hope he doesn't go on for many more years. I hope he retires sooner rather than later, personally, because I don't think he can do any more than he's done already at his age, you know? I think if he carries on for, let's say, 2 years, he's going to get beat. I think he's reached the point of diminishing returns if he goes on past now. Jay says, I did enjoy watching MMA fans lose their minds watching AJ almost kill Ngannou. They couldn't believe it. Yeah, they got way, way, way too carried away after the Tyson Fury fight. Totally carried away. And actually the AJ fans got carried away as well, but not so much with Ngannou. They got carried away criticizing Fury. They were all saying that, Danny says, is that footage from the Pocket 3? Looks very good. No, this is not from the Pocket 3. This footage is just from a smartphone. I do have other footage from the Pocket 3 that looks a lot better than this. The Pocket 3's got a gimbal on it, so it's a lot more stable than this footage. I'll maybe put some Pocket 3 footage up in a subsequent stream. This is just on my smartphone with no gimbal or anything. The Pocket 3 footage is better. But sometimes it's just easier to use the smartphone. Since it's with you all the time, I don't carry the Pocket 3 everywhere I go, and, you know, I usually bring it for specific purposes or whatever if I want to film something. But yeah, what's my train of thought? Oh yeah, so the AJ fans got carried away criticizing Fury after the Ngannou fight. To me, it was very clear that Fury hadn't trained for the fight. He wasn't focused. He came in fat as a pig. He thought he was going to be a knockover job. Very clear that that was not the best version of Fury. But when I said that in the post-fight, the AJ fanatics were trying to take my head off. You know, they're like, what are you talking about? Stop making excuses for Fury. That was the best version of Fury that there's ever been. I was like, are you having a laugh? The best version of Fury there's you lot are it's obviously a Fury who hadn't trained. Copen says, any footage of you sparring amateur fights, would you ever post them online? There is footage of me of some of my amateur fights that exists, yes, on VHS at my parents' house. And they live in a different country. That's if they've even kept the box with the VHS tapes in it and they haven't thrown it out. Because my mom especially has a habit of just throwing stuff out, like my stuff, and so I think it still exists, but it's on VHS, so it's not even in a digital format that will be easy to upload. I'd need a VHS player, and then from that, some kind of converter to put it in the digital format and all that type of stuff. Kayvon Green says, wait, this footage isn't stock? No, this footage was taken. Well, it's my own stock footage taken by me. I guess you're being sarcastic because it's so shaky. I don't know, but yeah, it's my footage. Jay Silver says, I do honestly believe Ngannou could beat this version of Wilder. I think it's a good fight. And Ngannou said he wanted to continue in boxing, but Did he really mean it? I think that's the fight that Turkey, if he wants to bring Wilder back, and it seems like he still wants him involved, not sure why, that's the fight you should put Wilder in. Not put Wilder in there against Caballero or anybody who's pretty much certain to beat him. Put him in there against Ngannou. Make it interesting. Both are coming off devastating knockout defeats in their last boxing match. Ngannou's won in MMA since. Neither guy's got great skills. Yeah, make Ngannou versus Wilder in a boxing ring. Fee Khabib says, Ben Davison at AJ looking the best he's ever looked, only to get chinned by Dubois in 4, looking horrible. Well, it was actually 5. But, you know, that one of the things I said, and obviously I picked AJ to beat Dubois, but one of the things I said before the fight, I made a video saying that this is the first real test. You know, the Dubois fight would be the first real test of AJ and Davison's relationship. The first real test, yeah, because in their first fight together, AJ fought Otto Wallin, a guy who he knew very well from sparring, a guy who he used to handle so easily in sparring, according to Richie Woodall, that AJ actually had to hold back to not stop Wallin in sparring. You know, he had to carry him through the sparring sessions to get the rounds in. So AJ knew exactly how to deal with him. He didn't need Ben Davison to tell him how to deal with Otto Wallin. And that's why he was so confident, I think, because he was so familiar with the guy. And again, handled him so easily in the gym. And then he fought Francis Ngannou, who's an MMA fighter, who had holes in his guard, holes in his defense that you could drive a Mack truck through. That's why I said AJ was going to handle Ngannou with ease. I was one of the people saying AJ's not going to have any problems with Ngannou at all. None. It's an easy fight for him. Despite what happened against Fury. Fury wasn't in shape. He hadn't trained. He didn't take it seriously. So I was saying all along, no, AJ's going to breeze that fight. That's not difficult at all for him. It's actually a joke fight. Chainsaw says, Hatman, have you ever been with a Thai woman? I don't want to go over there and actually connect with one and end up being accused of just getting a Thai bride. No, I haven't. I've only ever dealt with black women. Never dealt with a Thai woman or any other type other than black women. Evil Uncle Phil says, I could be wrong, but I think Eddie Hearn got a big reality check last year when he did Soccer Aid, and most people didn't know who he was. Fury is doing it, and most people will know him there. Fury is looking for, in my opinion, attention, because he misses the attention for boxing. So he's looking for a substitute somewhere where he can get the attention. And of course, he'll eventually return to the ring, as he has so many other times when he's quote-unquote retired. Jupiter String says, one of the recent traits that bothers me about AJ is his emphasis on being a warrior as opposed to a victor. He seems outwardly unbothered with getting chinned so long as he gave it his all. And, you know, I've kind of spoken about this in the past, as have other people that have commented in on previous live streams. And there's a possibility that the reason AJ's so happy and buoyant now after the Dubois defeat is because all of the pressure is now off his shoulders. I'm not sure how many of you guys have seen the movie Kung Fu Hustle. So the main character in Kung Fu Hustle wants to be a fighter. He wants to be a tough guy. But he's basically useless at fighting. And the basic premise of it is he's so afraid of being humiliated that actually hinders his fighting performance. Once he takes this terrible beating by the villain in the movie called the Beast, which virtually kills him, he is reborn. You know, I think he actually does in the movie go into like a chrysalis, like a butterfly. And when he emerges, There's a couple of characters in the film called the Tragic Couple. I think they're called a Tragic Couple. And they say that the beating that he took from the Beast unleashed his chi flow and it allowed him to be a kung fu genius. Right? And so from a psychological perspective, it's possible that that's happened to AJ, that he might, be happier after being knocked out and whatnot because all the pressure's gone, all the expectation's gone. And rather than thinking about himself and putting the pressure on himself to be the best, he's just thinking, I'm just going to go out there and enjoy myself and whatever happens, happens. Sometimes fighters perform better with that type of mindset. Everybody's different. We shall see. But personally, I think AJ's finished. Even if his mindset is better now, I think neurologically and physically, he's not going to be the same. Evil Uncle Phil says the Saudis probably feel like Wilder finessed them by those 2 poor Riyadh season performances. Yeah, possibly. They paid him a load of money and he didn't even show up, figuratively speaking. Johnny Gaffer says, made the easiest money on AJ KO Ngannou ever. The bookies were so naive. Yeah, I was surprised so many people thought that Ngannou was going to go in there and smash AJ to pieces. I mean, you expect it from the MMA fans because they don't know boxing. But from boxing people, I was surprised so many people thought he was going to beat AJ. Like, come on. Fury clearly didn't train. And even in the Fury fight, Ngannou was very easy to hit. I mean, his guard was just wide open. He doesn't have a boxing guard. And he didn't have quick enough reflexes to compensate for such an open guard. I was just like, no, AJ's going to punch holes in him. Going to punch holes in him. Sizzler says, Hatman, you need to try all the flavors of the world. Why? I have no desire to. Strangingness says, Kung Fu Hustle, bro. Yup. Old school. Kayvon Green says, I think physically AJ is intact. I think mentally he is not. Whereas Fury is mentally fine, but physically the guy is shot. Well, I would have agreed with you. But in the Dubois fight, AJ didn't seem to have the reflexes to react to what was happening. Yeah, he had the reflexes to deal with Ngannou, who's not a boxer. The reflexes to deal with Otto Wallin, who he handled in sparring easily, according to Richie Woodall, for years. But when he came up against somebody who was a top-level boxer in his prime, AJ's reflexes look slow. So maybe he's not as physically intact as I thought he was beforehand. Because I thought he'd be able to, exploit Dubois' defensive weaknesses and whatnot, but he couldn't. Other than that one moment in the 5th round, right before AJ got chinned, he wasn't able to actually land anything significant on Daniel Dubois. Dubois set about him, and AJ was forced to rush his punches, and yeah, the timing wasn't there. And certainly mentally, I think AJ's totally shot. And maybe neurologically. Maybe when he gets hit, his body is reacting worse than ever. Shout out to Danny for the super chat. He says, Artika's some of the most attractive women. I watched the Spanish learner out there, and some of the women he met were on par with the Western models. Well, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So, all depends on your particular taste and what you find attractive. I would say in terms of face, rather than body as well, but just face, ticas, we're talking now about Costa Rican women, they're generally quite pretty. In terms of their face, they're quite pretty. Kind of like, a lot of Japanese women in terms of just the face. I don't really, personally, I'm not into the body shape of a lot of Japanese women is not really for me, but their face tends to be, a lot of the time, very pretty. At least for my taste. Japanese women have got pretty faces, and a lot of those Oriental women have got pretty faces. So in a similar way, yeah, a lot of the ticas have pretty faces. The Celtic Magician says, I don't like models. Me neither. Not catwalk models anyway. Kayvon Green says, Costa Rican girls are so possessive. Yeah, most Latinas are very possessive. They're very homely and family oriented and stuff like that. But if you start cheating on them, you're going to see some wild stuff. If you catch them cheating, you're going to see some wild behavior. Yeah. CPB says, I have a feeling that Chisora could fight Daniel Dubois for the IBF championship at a big stadium now that Usyk is mandated to fight Parker. It will be a good tune-up for Triple D. Gotta hope not. Chisora versus Dubois, no thank you. First Round Boxing says, sorry I'm a few minutes behind listening to the Ngannou question. A lot of MMA fans, including True Geordie, thought Conor McGregor would beat Floyd. Yeah, MMA fans tend to overestimate their fighters in a boxing context, for sure. Who is that guy that was working for one of the broadcasters? Was he working on DAZN? Is it Dan Hardy? I think it's Dan Hardy, right? And he was absolutely adamant that Ngannou was going to go in there and smash AJ to bits in a couple of rounds. Sanika Blade says, I'm scary. Okay, you Latina. So if a man does you wrong, you better keep those knife drawers locked. Yes, a lot of Latinas, very passionate, They catch you creeping, it's a problem. Encircled says, Brendan Schwab is another one. Brendan Schwab is an idiot. I don't think he knows anything about anything, that guy. Just an idiot all round. Rexan says, I didn't catch the start of the stream. Have you mentioned Atama versus Heisa? No. Has that fight been made? Is that Atama's opponent for this April 5th card? I don't think I've actually seen Heisa fight. I've only seen him in the rankings. Is he any good? Sizzler says, Hatman, have you ever been to, what is that, Cyprus flag? Yes, I've been to Cyprus, if that's the Cypriot flag. Yes, I have been there. Many, many, many moons ago. Back in the 90s? CPB says, I'm picking Hrgovic over Joyce, but if Hrgovic loses, he's done, in my opinion. I think it depends on the nature of the loss. One of the things I will say with boxing fans is that the Mayweather effect is a real thing. Boxing fans generally are too quick to write fighters off. Again, bear in mind, Hrgovic has only had one loss, and that was to Daniel Dubois in a fight that he was doing very well in the early going. People talking about Ayia Napa. I've never been to Ayia Napa, and I never wanted to go. I got invited a couple of times. I was like, no, thank you. Never wanted to go. Encircled says, I think Hrgovic wins a rematch with Dubois. If he fought sensibly, I reckon it's possible. Shout out to Black Dynamite. Says, one thing that's impressive about the UFC model is that non-English speaking foreigners can get 500k pay-per-view buys in the US. But that's more because of the power of the UFC brand, isn't it? So the UFC brand is what is doing a lot of the selling on those pay-per-views. People buy into the brand so much that they're like, well, I don't know these names, but I know that UFC always delivers entertainment, so let me go ahead and buy the pay-per-view anyway. Rexan says, Itama versus Heisa on Mo Boxing, Mo Problems. He said Itama would be headlining versus Nisa. I can't imagine he'll be headlining. If he's still on the show on April 5th, then Joyce against Hrgovic will be headlining. Unless they're putting that fight on a different show. Ayed says UFC hasn't had 500 pay-per-view buys in years. Even Uncle Phil says, I wonder why Hrgovic has gone so quiet. I'm assuming he's not with Matchroom anymore. Another L for Hearn. Well, yeah, if you look at the announcement poster that Queensbury put up for the Joyce Hrgovic fight, below the poster, they say that Hrgovic has now joined the home of heavyweight boxing, which implies that he's signed with Queensbury. And I did float this out as a possibility on yesterday's live stream because I figured that that's a very dangerous fight for Joyce, who's a Queensbury fighter. So perhaps they're looking to sign Hrgovic as part of the deal of giving him the opportunity fighting Joyce, you know? And indeed, that does seem to be the case. Okay, Rexan says, I thought so as well, Hatman. No, it's on the Joyce Hrgovic show. It was on Instagram, by the way. Osaka Castle. Now, Coppen says, is Abel Sanchez Hrgovic's new trainer? If so, he will finally get a jab and throw body punches. Will his punching power increase? I haven't heard anything official about Sanchez being his new coach, but he does appear to be training in Big Bear. And the only trainer I know who trains fighters up there is Abel Sanchez. So I think it's reasonable speculation that he may be training with him now. Certainly some people online are saying that he is. Will his punching power increase? It might do, although it may take a couple of fights before people see any difference, because Sanchez obviously trains for power. That's how he coaches people, to hit hard, to sit down on their shots. He uses the punch shield a lot rather than using mitts all the time. He likes to use the punch shield. CPB says, does anyone else feel like Dana White's passion for the UFC has declined in recent years? Well, I don't know if I've seen enough of Dana White to answer that question. But what I will say is, the MMA fans, UFC fans specifically, for the longest time have been telling us that UFC destroys boxing, boxing is garbage. You know, they always just bag on boxing all the time, trashing boxing constantly. If MMA and UFC are so much better than boxing and so head and shoulders above boxing, why on earth does Dana White want in? See, that doesn't jive with all the rhetoric we've been hearing from the MMA fans over the years. And I'm not trying to make this MMA versus boxing. That's what they do. I like MMA. I respect MMA. I'd much rather, you know, I'd far more fancy my chances in a street fight against a fellow boxer than an MMA fighter, right? So I respect MMA completely. But just looking at it objectively, if UFC is destroying boxing the way that the UFC fans claim it is, then why does Dana White want in? Huh? He wants in because boxing is massive. People are too focused on the American market. Boxing's bigger than the American market. There are people making, you know, $100 million purses outside of America in boxing. I don't know why, you know, MMA fans are so myopically focused on the American market as if boxing doesn't exist outside of America. It's bizarre. And that is why Dana White wants in. Because boxing is hot. He figures he can bring some order and dominate the market. And he knows that boxing is a bigger market than MMA too. Dana White knows that. It's a much bigger market than MMA. Way bigger. Osaka Castle says, never understood why you can't enjoy both. Indeed, I enjoy both. I mean, I prefer boxing, but I've watched plenty of MMA over the years too. MMA is great. 1 second. Danny says, Hampman, I think many fans have forgotten how bad some of the boxing cards were pre-Turkey. UFC was doing very well a few years ago, but not so much now. Well, the boxing cards are better since Turkey has come on board for sure, but there were still plenty of good cards going on even pre-Turkey. Loads of good cards. That's why boxing had become so big. Because there were plenty of good cards going on, you know, pre-Turkey. It's just that Turkey, things have been concentrated and ramped up to a whole new level. But there were still plenty of good cards, you know, still plenty of good fights. We had to wait a little longer for them, but they were still happening, for sure. And Dana White wanted to get into boxing even then. Dana White's been talking about getting into boxing long before Turkey came on the scene. Why would he want to do that if boxing was so dead, as MMA fans have been telling us for all these years? If boxing's dead, why would Dana White want to even get into it? Why not just continue doing MMA and then, you know, allow boxing to be irrelevant? Dana White has always wanted in because he knows that there's more money in it, actually. If he can implement his model especially, I mean, the money he could make from boxing if you implemented the UFC model successfully would dwarf what he's made in UFC. Now, Big Spud says Dana started with small hall boxing, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, he did, but boxing is harder to get into than MMA was. See, MMA was basically virgin territory. So it was easier. It's like, you know, whenever you have a new industry, the people who end up being the major players are the ones who get in early. Dana White got in early on MMA, but in boxing, he missed the boat. I mean, trying to become a major promoter in boxing is extremely difficult because you've got an establishment. You've got all of these existing promotional companies that go back decades and decades, and they've got relationships with loads of people in the industry, and they'll freeze out smaller promoters, you know? That's what boxing's like. Whereas with MMA, it was, let's say, virgin territory. It was all there to be done, and that's what Dana White did. He probably found it was too difficult to get into boxing. Not just because of the promoters, but also because of a lot of the organized crime, quite frankly, that were heavily involved in boxing in the 80s and the 90s and are still involved in boxing to some extent even now. But shout out to Danny for the super chat. A Big Spud says, well, he started in the 90s, which would have been pretty tough, I imagine. Yeah, very tough. In the 90s, you had Don King still running the show. Danny says, Eddie Hearn's smirk has returned recently. Is it a fake smirk? You know, is it a forced smirk? Shout out to Matt for the super chat. He says, how difficult will it be for boxers in TKO if they transition from 12 rounds to 5 3-minute rounds? 5 minute, 3, 5, what? I'm trying to understand this. 5 minute, 5 rounds. Please clarify that. Do you mean 5 3-minute rounds or 3 5-minute rounds? In MMA, it's 3 5. No, in MMA, it's 5 3-minute rounds, isn't it? Or is it? No, it's 5 5-minute. God, I forget now. I think it's 5-minute rounds in UFC, right? Shout out to Al Booger for the super chat. Al Booger. In championship fights in UFC, it's 5 rounds, right? I think that's a weird format for boxing. A very weird format. I don't think 5-minute rounds is good for boxing. I think it will make fights worse. Because there'll be more fatigue, more clinching, and stuff like that in fight with 5-minute rounds. So I don't think that's good for boxing. I think the 3-minute rounds is perfect for it. It works in MMA because they throw less punches. There's more moving around, grappling, kicking, and stuff like that. Whereas in boxing, it's just punching. So I don't think 5-minute rounds is going to work, personally. Shout out to Solomon in the live chat. Big up, Solomon. The Vanilla Tech says Usyk wouldn't mind the 5-minute rounds. Yeah, he probably wouldn't. Encircled makes a good point. He says 5 rounds also causes some awful scoring. And 5-minute rounds, I have to imagine, will cause awful scoring because there's more chance for the judges to forget stuff that's happened earlier on in the round, if the rounds are longer. This comment here says, did you see Eddie Hearn's Kryptonite freestyle? Was it Eddie Hearn actually doing the freestyle or some person doing an impression? Because I saw somebody that did an Eddie Hearn impression and it was like a song that they'd made. And I thought it was pretty terrible. I didn't rate it at all. Osaka says boxing used to be 15 rounds, I believe. Crazy. Yeah, boxing used to be 15 rounds up until the 1980s. The last heavyweight title fight that was scheduled for 15 rounds was Mike Tyson versus Tyrell Biggs. It never went anywhere near 15 rounds. Mike Tyson stopped Tyrell Biggs, I think it was in the 6th or the 7th, but it was scheduled for 15. And in the very early days of Queensberry Rules boxing, there were many more rounds than that. 20 rounds, 25 rounds. Oh, yeah. And in the very, very, very early days, there was no limit on the rounds. It was just box until somebody gives up. Encircled says, what do you think about undisputed fights being 15 rounds? I think it's a good idea. Yeah, to differentiate, to not commemorate, but yeah, to do something different to a regular championship fight, to emphasize how special Undisputed is. Yeah, 15 rounds. Let's do it for Undisputed. CPB says, was Holmes Spinks the last heavyweight title fight to go 15 rounds? I'm not sure. It might have been, but I'm not sure, so don't quote me on it. I'm not sure. But I can tell you that the last one scheduled for 15 was Tyson versus Tyrell Biggs. But the last one that actually went 15, I'm not sure. Alter Ego says Butterbean would have done John Fury bad. Yeah, probably. See, the thing is, a lot of these guys can do 15 rounds. Yeah? A lot of top pros spar 15 rounds in the gym. Because they want to make sure that they've got plenty in the tank for 12. Okay, God of Frog says, no, probably Eric Esch would massacre John Fury. Poor John. Albuga says, could you imagine Big Bang in a 15-rounder? I don't think he could imagine himself in a 15-rounder. CPB says, Eubank Jr. probably would have stopped George Groves in a 15-round fight. Well, yeah, because Groves dislocated his arm, right? So maybe Eubank Jr. would have done him. But then again, I swear Groves maybe even won that final round after dislocating his arm. He's dislocated his shoulder. Eubank fought terribly that night. Terribly. He was swinging all over the place. Looked awful. It's like he forgot that straight punches actually existed. Rexan says, do you think Delicious Ori will go somewhere in the pros? Too early to say for certain, but I haven't been impressed by what I've seen of him in the amateurs. To me, he looks like he might be another Tony Yoka, but time will tell. Ayed says, I think Groves dropped Eubank with a jab in that fight. Yeah, he did, but it didn't get called. Eubank's knee touched the canvas. Shout out to Danny for the super chat. Yeah, Groves hurt him a couple times. Eubank looked scared in that fight. He looks scared to death. Shook. Scared to death, scared to look. Shook. Osaka Castle says, wasn't that at Saudi? I remember backing Callum Smith. I liked the Muhammad Ali trophy tourney. No, the Eubank Groves fight was not in Saudi, I don't think. I think that was in the UK. The final was in Saudi with Groves fighting Callum Smith, yeah. Matt says, do you think the mob still influences big fights? I don't know. the mob, if you've seen Godfather Part 3, that's what the mob are like now. The mob are into a lot of legitimate businesses and whatnot now. They still exist as far as I'm aware, but they're more legit and they're less into, violent crime. Obviously, back in the days, they did a lot of robberies and heists and stuff like that. It's not really like that anymore. I think they've diversified their criminal activities into like cybercrime and stuff like that, from what I've heard. And they don't really strong arm people as often. Again, this is my perception. They don't really strong arm people as often as they used to. Because back in the days, they would strong arm a lot of athletes and, get them into gambling debts and threaten them and get them to throw games and whatnot. So I'm sure that there's still some mob involvement in boxing in the United States, but I can't imagine it's as heavy as it used to be. And if it is as heavy as it used to be, I think the nature of it is probably quite different. Afro Jam says, yeah, well, not the American mafias. Yeah, the Italian-American mafia, I think, have diversified their activities away from what they used to do. Strangingness says, here's one for you. The mafia was started by the Freemasons. Well, I don't know about that. Were there some Freemasons who were in the mob? I'm sure there were, but to say that the Freemasons started the mafia, I don't know. I mean, the mafia originally, of course, was a secret society. Yeah, it was an organization which the FBI denied the existence of. J. Edgar Hoover publicly denied that the mafia existed. He actually mocked people who claimed that the mafia existed. So yeah, the mafia, the Italian-American mob, to be precise, were a secret society. And they really remained a secret society up until the Godfather movies came out. It's only then that the Italian-American mob came into public consciousness, because prior to that, the mob was spoken about in the criminal underworld and, of course, in the Italian-American community. But outside of that, people really didn't know. The wider public didn't know what the mob was or who they were or anything like that. It was just whispers, But after the Godfather movies came out, it's like, yeah, it was like a revelation. It's almost like, believe it or not, the gang violence and prevalence of gangs in the inner city American ghettos wasn't widely known about outside of certain cities. Certainly outside of America, people didn't know what was going on in those Black American ghettos. And it was certain movies that brought it to like wider public attention. But yeah, the Italian-American mob were originally a secret society. And of course, they have their initiation ritual where they put they prick your hand or cut your hand or finger or whatever it is, and you've got like a picture of a saint in your hand and they burn it. So they've got their little rituals and whatnot. Initiation rituals when you get made. Shout out to Danny for the super chat. He says, have you ever been to Zanzibar? Looks good out there. I haven't, but I'm definitely planning to go. People are talking about the Irish mob. It's an interesting thing. Ireland is a first world country that overall has pretty low crime. Nowhere near the level of crime that you get in third world countries, right? But the Irish underworld is extremely violent, like insanely violent, the Irish underworld. And I've always wondered why that is. You know, my perception is that the Irish underworld is more violent than like the English underworld. I don't know why the Irish drug gangs are so extreme in the violence that they carry on with. They literally are doing like Mexican cartel type violence, them Irish drug gangs and whatnot. It seems almost out of place, you know, in a first world country to have that level of violence in the underworld. Shout out to the Sweet Maths for the super chat. The Sweet Math says, Sky put Eddie's trainers in the photo deliberately. We're still, we're going back to that one. Trollsabad says mass immigration is getting to Ireland now. Yeah, but I'm not referring to immigrants. I'm referring to like indigenous Irish criminals. They are extremely violent. You know, like, if you ever watch the videos like on YouTube about the back and forth between the different Irish drug gangs, it's crazy the stuff that they do. First Round Boxing says there's an Irish heavyweight, Thomas Carty, who's basically the Irish Johnny Fisher. Yeah, isn't he still managed by Dylan White? Chainsaw says, can't believe you're still going, Hat Man. I've been gym, showered, stopped at a cafe, and now driving home, still listening. Shout out to Anton. He says, yes, Hat Man, my mate is in Brazil. And a week or so ago, he seen Dubois on the beach. Said he was acting annoyed. He got spotted and wanted to keep a low profile. Makes me believe more these Parker rumors. Well, Dubois is a pretty extreme introvert, and as many of us have speculated, he may well be on the spectrum. So I would be surprised if he was happy to get spotted. I would expect Dubois to be the kind of person that doesn't really want to talk to the public when he's seen. So I don't find that in and of itself particularly suspicious. But shout out to Anton. Shout out to James Wood. He says a lot of the Irish have been fetched up on the hard road. Like John Fury, who claims he fought the Irish bare knuckle champion back in the 90s for 100 grand and can't remember his name. As if you fought someone in a straightener for 100 grand, you'd never forget their name for the rest of your life. That's more money than John Fury ever made for his pro bouts. But yet he remembers the name of all the people he fought in professional fights, doesn't he? But claims he fought a bare knuckle against an Irish champion, bare knuckle champion, for 100 grand that he can't remember his name. Yeah, okay. Matt says, I know Dubois. He's just socially awkward. Stupidly nice guy, though. I've known Dubois for about 10 years. Oh, wow. You actually know Daniel Dubois personally? Yeah, socially awkward. I suspect he's on the spectrum, and that would explain why he's so socially awkward. Why he still lives with his dad. He's 27. He still lives with his dad. He's a millionaire, multi-millionaire, and he still lives with his dad. Now, if he was living in a, very conservative, traditional country and culture, that wouldn't be that strange. But in Britain, it's very strange for a multi-millionaire young man, athlete, to be living at home with his dad at 27. It's not like his dad needs to be taken care of, But I put that down to my suspicion that he's on the spectrum. Mark Hatch says, Dubois doesn't seem like a nice guy. It's Frank Warren who told him to act in a way, or does seem like a nice guy, excuse me. It's Frank Warren who told him to act in a way that turned fans off from him. Sizzler says, Hatman, do you think the Dubois versus Larry fight was stopped too early? Larry had Dubois rocked at one point. Larry who? Oh, Latte. I can't remember how the fight ended, to be fair. I know he stopped him. But I can't remember how it precisely ended. Matt says Dubois is on the spectrum, very high functioning. That's all I'll go into it. Yeah, he has the typical traits that you associate with someone being on the spectrum, That's why many, many people believe that he is without ever seeing any kind of diagnosis. Matt says, a thing you should know, Hatman, Dubois has severe anxiety issues. Take that how you will about him leaving the Parker fight. And that's another thing that is common with people on the spectrum, is a lot of them will suffer with severe anxiety at certain times, and they have episodes and whatnot. I guess you're kind of hinting that maybe it wasn't an illness that caused Dubois to pull out of that fight, but rather a panic attack or whatever. All right, peeps, going to draw the curtain on this one. Shout out to everybody, as always, for joining the conversation. It's been very enjoyable. Hopefully it has been for you guys as well. And a special shout out to everyone who donated via Super Chat. So until the next one, take care, be good, and I'll catch you on the other side. I'll leave you with a couple more minutes of nice scenery, all right? I'm out.